5. How may I serve thee? The fifth law of wealth. Dr. King and I integrated the lunch counter, but we never integrated the dollar. And to live in a system of free enterprise and yet not to understand the rules of free enterprise, that's the definition of slavery. Andrew Young. Martin Luther King Jr. was not a wealthy man. At the height of his career spearheading the civil rights movement, he never earned more than $10,000 a year. At age 35, King was the youngest person to receive the Nobel Prize. When notified of the honor, he announced that he would give the prize money, $54,123, to further the cause for justice and equality. Nonetheless, like so many of the financial elite profiled within this study, King was more than aware of the force and logic behind the fifth law of wealth. King was in many ways an unlikely leader of an unlikely organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a loose alliance of 100 or so church-based activist groups. At the time, he had neither the quiet brilliance nor the sharp administrative capabilities of Roy Wilkins of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. He had none of the corporate contacts or business connections of the National Urban League's Whitney Young. He did not have the sharp tongue of James Farmer of the Congress of Racial Equality, the youth and raw militancy of John Lewis of the Students' Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the bristling wit of best-selling author James Baldwin. Furthermore, King did not make his mark in sports or entertainment, where so many people of his race have long been prominent. Nor was he an imposing figure. In his stocking feet, he was 5 foot 7 inches tall, and he weighed barely 170 pounds. His dress? Conservative at best. He owned 6 suits, 4 black and 2 gray. Although he wasn't much of a social butterfly, after graduating first in his class from Pennsylvania's Crozer Theological Seminary, King could converse with the best of them on the social impact of Thoreau, Hegel, Kant, and Gandhi, but all that would soon change. In the early evening of Thursday, December 1st, 1955, a Montgomery, Alabama City Lines bus rolled through Court Square and headed for its next stop in front of the Empire Theater. Aboard were 24 black riders, seated from the rear toward the front, and 12 whites, seated from the front to the back. At the next stop, 6 whites boarded the bus. The driver, as he was trained to do, walked to the rear and asked black riders to vacate their seats. 3 complied except Rosa Parks, a seamstress and secretary for the local chapter of the NAACP. "I really don't know why I didn't move," Parks later explained. "There was no plot or plan. I was just tired and my feet hurt." Parks was arrested and, in due course, fined $10 for violating Alabama state law. Overnight, Parks' encounter flashed throughout various black neighborhoods. "Support Rosa Parks. Don't ride the bus Monday." Parks was not the first African-American rider to break the law in this way, but for some reason, this incident triggered the frustration of Montgomery's disenfranchised black community. Countless African-Americans had suffered worse indignities, but hers was the single act that the South would long remember. In Montgomery, 80,000 whites generally believed there was no problem with the 50,000 blacks who lived within the city's boundaries. Working mostly as farmhands or domestic servants for $15 to $20 a week, blacks who called Montgomery home had neither geographic nor political unity. However, within 48 hours of Rosa Parks' arrest, mimeographed leaflets and handwritten signs were posted and distributed in every nook and cranny within the black community, calling for a one-day bus boycott. That Monday, blacks walked, rode mules, drove horse-drawn buggies, and traveled to work in private cars. The hastily organized boycott was more than 99% effective and took a toll on Montgomery's bus line before economically crippling this vibrant southern city. On the day of the strike, some 24 black ministers decided to push for continuance of the boycott. Their original demands were minor. 1. Blacks would still be seated in the rear, but seats would be handled on a first-come, first-served basis. 2. Blacks would be treated with courtesy, dignity, and respect. And 3. Black drivers would be hired to navigate routes throughout black areas. To direct the protest, the boycott committee soon became the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, and it selected Dr. King, a 25-year-old preacher from Atlanta, Georgia, to lead the organization. Marketing 101. Looking at King's game plan, one would think that the young minister was a polished entrepreneur bent on closing one big deal after another. After his morning coffee, a glass of orange juice, and an hour in prayer and meditation, King made his way to his office at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. Once there, his first stroke of business was to draft a sophisticated marketing plan akin to a full-scale product launch, focused on sharing the story of the boycott not only in Montgomery's local juke joints and pool halls, but across the nation as well. To measure his reach, King immediately called a statewide meeting where more than 5,000 followers offered to help. With that type of support, he quickly shaped a network where 200 volunteers offered the use of their cars, and nearly 100 pickup stations were positioned along frequently used routes. Church and mass meeting collections kept the Improvement Association afloat, but King took his message global by tapping supporters as far away as Europe, India, and the Far East. In less than 1 year, he raised nearly $600,000, but fundraising was only part of the picture. At every turn, King orchestrated and outmaneuvered Montgomery officials. For example, when city and state authorities went to court in order to freeze MIA assets, King had funds scattered around the country in out-of-reach northern banks. With a sound cash flow, he bought 20 new station wagons earmarked for the carpool and had the vehicles insured by black insurance agents backed by the financially stable Lloyd's of London. He doubled his staff to keep up with increased communication demands, pounding out nearly 100 letters and press releases daily. Much like a Madison Avenue marketing executive attempting to craft a precise message, King insisted that whoever marched with him had to wear their Sunday best. That was the image he wanted splashed across the airwaves and collective conscious of America. Peaceful, law-abiding black Americans as they walked home from church, being hounded and harassed by whites armed with rifles and water hoses and barely restrained vicious dogs. It wasn't long before that picture began to take hold. Mimeograph machines in the cramped headquarters worked around the clock. By now, the MIA agenda had spread to include voter registration and equal employment. And if this were not enough, with ever-increasing funding, King and his staff created a credit union before considering a savings and loan association to provide capital for black business and sorely needed mortgages for would-be black homeowners who were denied traditional financing outlets. 14 months after Rosa Parks sat down, a race stood up. Black patrons, the city's #1 consumer group, had made their point. Dr. King and his team met with a slew of lawyers and city officials in Montgomery's administrative offices to announce the end of the boycott. The MIA was jubilant. Whites breathed a sigh of relief, and the young leader turned marketing strategist made the cover of Time magazine. That evening, December 21st, 1956, Dr. King addressed an emotionally charged church gathering where he admonished his followers not to gloat, but to take their victory humbly. "We've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go," he told those in attendance. "I would be terribly disappointed if any of you go back to the buses boasting." Then he began to share a biblical verse that serves as the cornerstone to his ministry. "It is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant." It is my hope that this story of the man who is now immortalized in stone will be used as a reference point regarding the impact of the fifth law of wealth. I share this historical tidbit not to analyze King's marketing or organizational prowess, though his management skills are worthy of emulation, but to show how he used the fifth law to literally change the racial, economic, and political direction of our world. By now, you should have a deeper understanding of the fundamentals of wealth and prosperity. It should be encouraging to note that the fifth law is well within the reach of those who care to embrace it. It is by this method that you can transform the little that you possess into much. How? By thinking differently. By not only serving others, but by adding value. We live in a world where products and services are no longer marketed. The art of marketing is the product or service. In other words, if it is wealth that you seek, begin to make a difference in the lives of others. When you do, you are well on your way to building your fortune. How the fifth law of wealth built a monument. In 1983, four fraternity brothers sat around a cluttered kitchen table debating the finer points of what was thought to be an improbable idea: whether a black man would ever be memorialized in the nation's capital. Over the next 3 decades, the fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, to which that black man, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., belonged, battled government commissions over location and design, kicked in $4 million in good faith money, and led a public campaign to justify why King deserved a place in the most revered section of the National Mall. Just when it appeared as if the project would collapse, a beacon of hope broke through the clutter. In 1996, the U.S. House of Representatives passed Joint Resolution 70, giving the fraternity the green light to build the memorial. Although the fraternity was overjoyed, Congress still doubted that the organization could complete the project. As one member who was close to the negotiations recalled, they were saying, "Here's the plan, here's the site, now go raise $120 million or you're going to be the folks who failed. Your credibility is on the line." Watching from the sidelines with checkbook in hand were executives from General Motors. Moved by the idea of a memorial to Dr. King, the automotive giant promised $10 million if the fraternity could identify someone to spearhead the project. That task fell to Houston, Texas attorney and businessman Harry E. Johnson. Despite a preacher's zeal and personal charm, the project that Johnson and his colleagues initially thought would take no more than 18 months lasted nearly a decade. Once in place, Johnson leaned on the practices and skill set that enabled him to develop several million-dollar businesses across the country. He quickly put to rest any debate as to why King deserved his place among America's most esteemed leaders. "We don't build memorials to men," Johnson explained to his critics. "We build monuments for the ideals they shared. I was 8 years old when Dr. King gave his 'I Have a Dream' speech. As a child, he taught me that anybody could lead because anyone can serve." Next, Johnson quickly galvanized a team and set out to attract major corporate sponsors. He rallied VIPs around the potential site, stood for interviews, shook hands, and forged partnerships. For nearly 10 years, before the first shovel of dirt was lifted, Johnson pushed and pitched, all in an effort to sell the memorial. "When you're starting off," Johnson pointed out, "and you approach corporations or individuals and you mention, 'Hey, we really need your help,' the response sometimes resembles, 'Yeah, right, come back later.' Those are the moments when you begin to think, 'All right, nobody really believes this is going to fly.' But I never went in asking for a handout. My entire approach centered on making a difference as well as promoting Dr. King's values. I told each donor that their support was a gift to the world. King was more than an African American. He was a global citizen." Or, when you must convince a potential donor that Dr. King really deserves a spot on the mall, Johnson continued, "When you've got to convince people, it's really disheartening. This should not be a hard sell." But corporate convincing was an integral part of his campaign. Thankfully, Johnson weathered all of the initial complaints, from the selection of a Chinese sculptor to the depiction of the image to the accuracy of Dr. King's quotes. Eventually, he pulled in sizable donations from Boeing, Ford, Tommy Hilfiger, Coca-Cola, and ExxonMobil. The logos of 89 companies and foundations are prominently displayed on the project's website, and million-dollar contributors are listed on a donor wall. But Johnson worked just as tirelessly to receive small checks from average Americans across the country. When millions of people visit the King Memorial, they will see listed the names of multi-billion-dollar corporations, but they will also see the names of churches that sacrificed funds for something that is bigger than their local congregation and community. The King Monument, Johnson explains, was financed by average men and women, black and white, who felt compelled to give a $70 gift. On October 16, 2011, as the world watched, the National Memorial to the iconic civil rights leader, 48 years after King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, was dedicated. The historic moment was the pinnacle of Harry Johnson's decade-long effort. Over the course of time, millions of visitors will reflect on the controversial likeness of the man, his legacy, and the significance of the first non-president and the first African-American immortalized on the National Mall. But ironically, most probably won't know who built it. They will find little about the pivotal role played by the black fraternity of which King was a member. The organization is more than a century old, but largely unknown to those outside of the black race. However, this matters little to the man who made it all possible, to the individual who stood motionless at the base of the site soaking in this once-in-a-lifetime experience. When asked how this day came to fruition, Johnson took a moment or two to set the record straight. I can now report that it wasn't Johnson's fundraising skills or corporate contacts that played a major role, nor was it the team effort between Johnson and his beloved fraternity. Far from it. In his own words, Johnson revealed the force behind the fifth law of wealth. At those very moments when I contemplated throwing in the towel and allowing someone else to handle the headaches, I thought about Dr. King. I mean, here was a man who, when given a choice, didn't think twice. For my and future generations, here was an individual who chose to endure the beatings, undergo the hardship, turn a cheek to the degradation, put up with the indecency, tolerate the inequities, and withstand the oppression in order that I could possibly enjoy a better life. The least I can do is try to make a difference, to try to leave this world in a better condition than what I found. I owe it to Dr. King to continue the struggle forward. Of all the questions asked by those who dare to walk under the banner of millionaire, only a handful stand above the rest. How will you serve your fellow man? How will you add value? Chance of a lifetime. Have you ever considered the possibility of thinking in different directions? Think about how you could create something new, in your business or in your chosen vocation. Remember, nothing is done to perfection. Nothing is final or complete. Regardless of what you desire, if it is in the realm of reality, you can obtain it through imagination and creativity and apply it to your line of work. Today, throughout the field of enterprise, nothing is being done the way it can be or will be done in the future. Change is the norm. The status quo is dull, boring, and obsolete. If you are to join the Millionaires Club, you will be forced to add value. That is, thinking in different, bold, and unique ways. Nearly 1 year ago, in 2011, during an entrepreneurship conference in the Bahamas, I shared the stage with Michael V. Roberts, the highly successful St. Louis-based real estate and hotel developer. Throughout our remarks, Mike and I intentionally emphasized the role that creativity and vision play in not only growing a business, but in snatching opportunity whenever it exists. Once we concluded our presentation, the floor was opened up for Q&A. It wasn't long before a smartly dressed woman walked down the aisle and asked this question. Given the current recession and the depressing state of affairs, what can a small business person such as myself do? Since I relish the moments that I spend with the financial elite, I take every opportunity to soak up their insight and rich wisdom. This conference in the Bahamas was no exception. I quickly shifted my eyes in Mike's direction. His response did not disappoint. With regard to the process of sidestepping the routine and the status quo and adding value, his response quickly set the tone for the conference. For openers, Mike replied, "The current economic state is not depressing. Interest rates are super low, industries are being reinvented, and the housing market is wide open. Right here on this tiny island, your countrymen and women have launched social movements, learned new skills, and built billion-dollar enterprises. Trust me, the current recession will end, and each of us will be forced to answer the question, what did you do when interest rates were at their lowest in 50 years, when technology was going through the roof, when corporations were fighting over talented employees, and when society was searching for the next big thing? I admonish you," Mike continued, not to answer those questions like the average individual who will be forced to say, I spent my time whining, waiting, worrying, wishing, and complaining, because that seems to be the norm. We still live in a world that's filled with opportunity. In fact, we have more than an opportunity. We have an obligation to spend our time doing great things, to find ideas that matter, and to share them, to push ourselves and the people around us to demonstrate gratitude, insight, and inspiration, to take risks and not only make our world better, but make it amazing. Are these crazy times? You bet. So stop thinking about how crazy the times are and start thinking about what the crazy times demand. There has never been a worse time for business as usual. Business as usual is sure to fail, sure to disappoint, sure to numb our dreams. The marketplace is searching for something exciting, something to feel passionate about, something to connect to. Those of us who live in the more enlightened part of the world are so fortunate. There is an entire world crying out for our gifts, our ideas, and our endless products and services. You get to make a choice. You can remake that choice every day. In fact, it's never too late to choose optimism, to choose action, to choose excellence. I suggest that you heed the words of Mike Roberts and become a person of deep value. Take stock of yourself. What is the special mark that only you can inscribe? To walk among the Black financial elite, those who've earned seven-figure incomes, remember, wealth is not an amount, but a habit, an act, an attitude. If you expect to become an important figure in the world of commerce, I suggest that you devote yourself to the idea that anything can be improved. If you envy and admire your employer, his or her independence, financial power, freedom from restraint, it will pay you to inquire as to the methods by which he or she rose to this position. Perhaps you will discover that the ascent to financial well-being began when this wealth creator committed him or herself to do the right thing, at the right time, in the right way, and with the right people. In short, to be a problem solver and not a problem, to do what needed to be done, never waiting to be told what to do. My focus was to create an enterprise that was built on maximizing shareholder value. Robert Bob Johnson got into the cable television business through total serendipity. To be honest, Johnson recalled during our interview, I got the idea for BET, Black Entertainment Television, while advising a client who wanted to create a channel for elderly viewers. I said, let me see. So I looked at his plan, and wherever he specified the term elderly, I altered and wrote Black. Black viewers comprise an impressive demographic. However, they are poorly depicted on television as well as the media. Amazingly, what Johnson has achieved since founding BET in 1980 has been based on anything but dumb luck. Armed with only a $15,000 bank loan and a $500,000 investment from cable magnate John Malone, Johnson created a 24-hour programming service aimed at the top television viewing segment, African American viewers. His idea began turning a profit in less than 5 years. By 1991, BET had risen to become the first Black-controlled company on the New York Stock Exchange. The enterprise later went private before being sold to media giant Viacom in 2001 in a deal valued at nearly $3 billion. And at the end of the day, Johnson was handed a $1.8 billion check while retaining his position as chairman and chief executive. The move also made him one of the nation's first Black billionaires and provided the seed capital to launch a handful of ventures, from hotels to banks to a National Basketball Association team, all of which are led primarily, if not entirely, by Black executives. Not bad for a boy who grew up the son of 2 assembly line workers and the only sibling among 10 who would attend and graduate from college. How did this media mogul get his start? In 1973, while working as a lobbyist in the cable industry, Johnson recognized the obvious need for increased cable programming. He understood that cable programming was going to be made available to the public, and he realized the limited offerings for African American viewers. Johnson resolved to make his move. This void in the cable marketplace was a large untapped market, and his solution was to create a new cable network, BET. But investors, particularly Madison Avenue, were skeptical. For years, the proverbial door was slammed in Johnson's face, and he often walked away from meetings with potential advertisers on the brink of tears. By all traditional business rules, Johnson should have fallen on his face or failed to get his plans off the drawing board. From the beginning, he had little money, less marketing clout, no distribution channels, and an untested product. The toughest part of his plan, he discovered, was not securing capital, but convincing reluctant advertisers of something that he already knew: Black America's wide viewing habits. Johnson recognized that he had a huge task before him. He knew it was expensive to launch a cable company, so he began seeking financial support from industry contacts and individual investors. Next, he was brazen enough to approach the nation's top advertisers, bolstered by data too significant for them to ignore. Each year, the Nielsen Media Research Group releases results of its annual survey on U.S. viewing habits. Since Black households are the largest demographic subgroup targeted by advertisers, they are researched independently. Based on 1980 data from 2,500 households, Nielsen concluded that, surprisingly, African Americans watch 23 more hours per week of television than comparable households. Moreover, Black children ages 17 and under view 11 more hours of television per week than their nearest counterpart. Daytime viewing in Black households is 55% higher than in non-Black households, and programs featuring positive Black characters are among the most popular programs. Johnson was not to be outworked. Twice a month, over a 2-year period, he traveled to Oak Brook, Illinois, home to the fast food powerhouse McDonald's, with the hopes of signing up the corporate giant as a sponsor. Johnson didn't recognize when all the pieces were in place. As an untutored lobbyist, the moment seemed so far beyond his entrepreneurial expertise that it made him nervous. In a frenzy of detailed negotiations, financial haggling, and managerial coordination, Johnson managed to overcome each bottleneck in turn. After working obsessively and securing a slew of resources, BET went on the air on January 25, 1980, with a 2-hour movie titled A Visit to the Chief's Son. The 1974 adventure centers on a father and his teenage son who draw closer together when they travel to Africa to study the rituals of the Maasai tribe. It was uplifting and pro-social, Johnson recalled, the right kind of thing for us in the early days. Ultimately, Johnson built BET into the largest minority cable channel in the country, reaching 66 million U.S. households. His rationale was a no-brainer. A major part of his formula: keep costs low and find inexpensive ways to provide programming. With ad rates substantially lower than those of his cable rivals VH1 and MTV, Johnson knew he couldn't create high-minded original programming. To fill the void, he aired sitcom rerun staples, such as The Jeffersons and Benson, in addition to late-night talk shows, comedy, and edgy videos. In his own quiet way, the persuasive entrepreneur made his pitch to dozens of corporate types who eventually bought into his ideas. And, as a result, BET exploded. After 2 consecutive years of red ink, the stream of viewers began to grow. More cable companies began to broadcast the station, and by 1989, BET was able to repay its investors and start on the road to sustained growth. 2 years later, BET made history as the first African-American-owned corporation to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Ad receipts skyrocketed, and Johnson found himself a multimillionaire media executive. He was 45 years old. Heart of the issue. As a businessman, Johnson had broken through doors that should have never been closed. After netting more than $1 billion in the sale of BET to industry giant Viacom, the man who worked longer, worked smarter, and lived more austerely than his detractors made a bold announcement. He would sell his flagship enterprise. When Johnson decided to sell to Viacom, the global mass media giant, he was openly criticized within the Black community for relinquishing African-American ownership of the network. Unmoved, Johnson was quick to assert that BET is different from most black businesses. Outside shareholders were always a vital component of the company, and besides, though others loved the idea of a black-owned television network, the bold and resourceful entrepreneur never viewed his groundbreaking enterprise as a family heirloom. "I never saw myself running a family business for my benefit only," he elaborated. "My focus was to create an enterprise that was built upon maximizing shareholder value. The fact is, black people don't have much of a history creating wealth in this country. As a result, we are sought primarily for our physical or artistic talent. Sad to say, when it comes to building value in companies or managing the money of others, we are nowhere to be found." And he didn't stop there. "As African Americans," he continued, "we must develop a culture that appreciates wealth. There's a tendency among our race to avoid any discussion of generating or retaining wealth simply because it's perceived as being boorish or narcissistic. We need a fresh outlook, a new mindset, a philosophy that praises wealth creation as much as we elevate those who work in our neighborhoods and communities. The social activist mold that was developed for Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson was not created for me, nor was the artistic mold that was set in stone for Oprah Winfrey and Jay-Z. That is not a part of my DNA. The recipe that was developed for me is the same formula that was created for Ken Chenault, Richard Parsons, and Stanley O'Neill. I create wealth and I add value. That's what I do." Since walking away from BET, Johnson has remained true to his mission. He has created the RLJ Companies, a holding company that represents a variety of business ventures, including a record label, more than 100 hotels. Although a board member within the Hilton umbrella of properties, he is the #1 hotel operator in the Marriott chain, private equity fund, and, of course, the Charlotte Bobcats basketball team. Which brings me full circle to Johnson's opening statement. New York Times sports writer William Roden was quick to point out when Johnson was introduced as the new owner of the NBA's expansion franchise in Charlotte, North Carolina, there was a mad scramble to determine whether the media mogul was the first African American to become principal owner of a major sports team. That depends on the definition of major. Robert Douglas, known as the father of black basketball, formed the revered Harlem Wrens in the 1920s. The Wrens were a major team, winning world championships in the next decade. In baseball, Rube Foster founded the Negro National League in 1920 and owned the Chicago American Giants. But in the context of our contemporary multi-billion-dollar sports culture, Johnson's purchase was unprecedented. No African American before him had owned a major stake of a team in a major sports league. As the number of black athletes increased, the lack of black ownership became a noticeable blemish. During his presentation to league officials, two traits came through loud and clear. Johnson is a businessman above all, and all other financial matters are relegated to the bottom line. This billionaire owner is a perfect fit for the NBA, where literally everything revolves around marketing and promotion. When the 29 owners met to vote on Johnson's bid and management team, they were quick to welcome him aboard. But the purpose of this profile is not to debate whether Viacom is a good corporate citizen and whether they will hold to the same interests of the previous owner. Nor is this example rendered to gauge whether Bob Johnson is truly the first black owner of a major sports team. No, the focus centers on a never-failing prosperity principle, the fifth law of wealth. That's most effective if uncovered by you, the listener. Bob Johnson held true to a specific plan while conditioning his mind so thoroughly that nothing could deter him from stamping his mark. In his own words, Johnson stated, "I wanted to create a business that is built on maximizing shareholder value." Your financial future, like a block of marble, stands untouched before you. In your abilities, talents, gifts, as well as this fifth law, you hold the chisel and mallet. The world has the right to expect a work of art, a masterpiece. You need only to utilize this fifth principle, which gives you the right to ask the universe for increased compensation. What will you hammer out? Given the resources at your command, society expects you to join the tasks of the financial elite, those who are deserving of earning seven-figure incomes. Great advantages bring great responsibilities. Will you shatter the marble into an unsightly piece of stone, or, like Dr. King, will you call out a monument of wealth, untold riches, and abundance, a symbol to future generations as well as those trapped by poverty and ignorance? The dramatic story of the man who created the 15th largest television network in the United States, creating 8 black millionaires in the process, is a perfect illustration of the power and reach of the fifth law. It's not about the money. The purpose of sharing Bob Johnson's message is not to discuss the challenges of wealth creation with regard to the black community, or to point blame or single out those who constantly struggle to attain wealth. No, this story runs far deeper than just a few pages or any one individual. Contained within his passage is a principle that you would do well to know. Somewhere in this profile, you will recognize yourself. This truth, sublime in its simplicity and powerful in its profundity, is the bare essence of abundance and prosperity. It's not so much about what I do, Johnson professed, it's about what I help others to do. I'm not concerned about what I've built. I'm more concerned about what I've helped others to build. Johnson's entrepreneurial drive to create BET arose from a fear that someone of equal talent and equal ability would beat him to the punch. If that would have happened, he confessed, I would have hated myself for the rest of my life. In all honesty, the entrepreneurial path that I traveled came about because I never really embraced the idea of working for someone else. It was never about the money. I was really forced to pursue this path because I don't enjoy taking orders. In other words, it was never my intention to work for the man. I wanted to be the man. In virtually every discussion I had with the black financial elite, each would underscore Johnson's remarks. It's not about the money. But this, I found, is one of the romantic fibs that so many of the wealthy tell themselves as well as anyone who will listen. This belief that it's not about the money somehow makes the ultra-affluent feel better about themselves. Perhaps it helps assuage misplaced guilt. At least it makes them feel humble. After nearly 7 years of similar discussions with these extraordinary men and women, I can tell you unequivocally that it is indeed very much about the money, but it's even more about making an impact, influencing others, and taking the road less traveled. Money is only a barometer, a scorecard, if you will, of their ability to add and deliver more value. Those surveyed within this text are staunch in their belief that you must first create substantial value, products or services that enhance the well-being of others before money will flow from any commercial enterprise. How will you attract more money? By creating more value. This is not simply a semantics issue. This is a completely different philosophy, mindset, and approach to the money that you currently possess. Instead of asking, how can I increase revenue? Begin to ask, how can I increase the quality of my service? Instead of asking, how can I expand my business? Ask, how can I make a difference? Rather than asking, how can I become wealthy? Ask instead, how can I become more valuable? I suggest that you begin to alter your mindset regarding this all-important principle within your life. What is the crux of Bob Johnson's message? Money is only a tool to exchange value. The only way to generate a 7-figure income is to deliver 7 figures worth of value. If people fail to perform more service than they are being paid for, then obviously they are receiving all the income to which they are entitled. In order to hold their position or maintain their sources of income, regardless of how they earn it, people must deliver the value for which they are being compensated. Every position, regardless of the task, level, or stature, provides each worker with the opportunity to advance his or her livelihood based on this often used principle. You may disregard or ignore this law if you so choose, but you cannot do so while simultaneously enjoying the fruits of enduring financial success. Universal language of money. To underscore this point, one early spring day, Operation Hope founder John Hope Bryant stood before a handful of my business students and explained his philosophy. It became obvious to me as early as 2006 that we are not only experiencing an economic crisis, but a crisis of virtues and values. Somewhere along the way, we lost our storyline. We moved away from the concept of capitalism and free enterprise as something that builds or enhances quality of life of society, and reduced it to that vehicle that simply makes money for me. For nearly 100 years, America has been that place where the power of an idea created amazing value for society, for customers, workers, shareholders, and yes, the entrepreneur who created it all. The problem is, in the past 10 to 20 years, American capitalists have confused value for money, effectively making the byproduct, money, power, and position in the world, the product, instead of making a difference in the lives of others or adding value. You ask anyone today, why are you in business? And 9 times out of 10 they will reply, I'm in business to make money. Why are you a basketball player? I play ball to get paid. Why are you on Wall Street? To make money. And on and on. This is the only time during my lifetime when a broker, investment banker, and the hustler in my old neighborhood share the same mindset and sink to the same level. We've lost our storyline. When a Wall Street investor shorts a stock of an otherwise healthy company and for no other purpose than to get paid, we must understand this investor not only neglected his obligation to his client, but he created nothing, and we, as a country, have lost our storyline. The entire game has revolved around money, which is wrong, and as a result, as a nation, we have lost our storyline. Ironically, responsible subprime lending, which is actually a good thing and arguably has done more to lift poor people out of poverty than any other financial program over the past 50 years, has turned into predatory subprime lending, which is not a good thing at all. Again, we have lost our storyline. But rainbows always follow storms, and people do not change in good times, they change in bad times. They do not change when they are comfortable, but rather when they are uncomfortable. Well, it's time for a change in our community. This is my cause and my life's mission, to teach the world's poor, underserved, and the struggling middle class the universal language of money and spread the precepts of financial literacy. There's no shame in the pursuit of the almighty dollar. But even if those surveyed and interviewed for this study would privately, if not publicly, admit that money was their primary motivation, the world would still benefit from their efforts and endeavors. Say what you will, but money, the almighty dollar, is the catalyst that primes the pump of worldly exchange. The want of money is a power strong enough to keep the world in balance. Money is one of the great principles of moral gravitation. What will humanity not do to satisfy this all-absorbing passion? What will humanity not risk or do in order to make ends meet? There are men and women born with a genius for capital who possess the instinct of accumulation. Their talent and inclination to convert dimes into dollars by bargains or shrewd investments are as strongly marked as the ability and inclination of Romare Bearden and Henry Osawa Tanner to produce memorable works of art, or Scott Joplin to compose piano rags, or Garrett Morgan to make life so much easier due to his inventions. It would be a gross dereliction of duty, a shameful perversion of gifts, had these people disregarded the instincts of their genius and shunned their talents by channeling their energies into other areas. I wish I could fill every adult who listens to these words with the utter dread and horror of poverty. I wish I could make every man or woman feel its shame, its constraint, its bitterness, to force them all to vow never to be poor. Without financial independence, no one can reach his or her true calling. No one can perform their best work when want and woe are tugging at their heels. when they are tied down and forever at the mercy of circumstances or on those upon whom they depend for employment. If people have to pay that much for existence, they are paying too high a price. What can be more humiliating than the sense of being but a day's march ahead of lack and want? Poverty is a condition that no one should choose willingly. We see the evidence of pinching, grinding, debilitating poverty everywhere. We see it in prematurely depressed faces. We see it in grown, able-bodied men, with cup in hand and earthly possessions in tow, navigating busy street corners and intersections while pleading for spare change. We find it in our women, trapped in a sea of hopelessness, single mothers who wish to make their lives and homes a centerpiece for their children, but, unfortunately, can't seem to make ends meet. We've uncovered it in our children, tender souls who've grown up too fast, too soon, robbed of their childhood and facing life short on skills and values and long on hardship. They're unable to cope, unable to find a shoulder on which to lean. They can be found fostering despair and doubt where love and hope should rule. Enticed by the lure of the streets, too many of our children get into crack before they get into Christ. Too many find gangs before they find God. And far too many are trapped in prison because they knew not the power of prayer. Praise it if you will, but poverty is a curse that will dwarf you mentally and spiritually. It invites disaster. There is scarcely a redeeming feature about it, and those who extol its virtues are generally the last to accept its conditions. It is difficult to be a man or woman while living in extreme poverty. Why? Because the poor are forever at the mercy of circumstances. They cannot be independent. They cannot command their time, and they cannot afford to live in the homes or surroundings of their choosing. It is difficult for a man to be a man or a woman to be a woman, proud and true, when want and lack stares him or her in the eye. Hampered with debt, bound in bondage to those on whom he depends, and forced to make a dime perform the work of a dollar. It is nearly impossible to preserve the dignity and self-respect that enables a man or woman to look the world squarely in the face. The lesson is clear. Poverty stifles ambition and thwarts brilliant plans. It is the duty of every man and woman to exert every effort to escape from its clutches. Though some may take exception, the pursuit of wealth is not only legitimate, but a duty. If people gain their fortunes through the honest sweat of their brows, the struggle to satisfy their own selfish instincts will increase their influence and multiply their power. This perpetual progress to attain wealth, if they are careful to guard against any narrowing, demoralizing, and negative influences, and if they understand that their possessions should not own them, will develop their intelligence, sharpen their skills, add to their energy, increase their thrift, and stabilize their character. No force has done more to promote and propel society while safeguarding any chance of civilization slipping back into chaos. Everybody and everything thirsts for the almighty dollar. Pride seeks it. What else besides pride can render power, position, and influence to those who possess it? Vanity yearns for it. What other force could make status-hungry people purchase fine clothing, sumptuous housing, fancy cars, and a host of material possessions that they cannot afford to buy? Love hopes for it. What loving parent doesn't want the best for his or her children? The church prays for it. Don't you hear it every Sunday? Send me your tithes and offerings. And even death gropes for it. After all, who wants to die poor? Empty pockets never held anyone back. Only empty heads and hearts can do that. Without the urge, this tremendous push for power, influence, and advantage that wealth provides, how could nature develop our best attributes? Without this infinite longing, from where would the discipline, faith, and perseverance that industry commands come? Without this constant struggle, what would motivate self-improvement, self-sacrifice, bold daring, and the need to take the calculated risk? Perhaps Orison Swett Marden said it best. It is very difficult for the rich to be so selfish that the poor cannot enjoy their wealth. Whether they rear it into architecture or place it into elegant carriages, whether they spend it in costly banquets, rare diamonds and precious stones, or build costly churches, summer residences, however they spend it or use it, thousands of others will see it, enjoy it, and carry away with their eyes a large share of the real value. So condemn the rich, berate the affluent, bemoan the well-to-do, but recognize that our values are based on our greenbacks more than our reputation. Our place in society is determined more by our assets than by our education and social graces. Even the pew to which the usher seats you in church is too often chosen with reference to your ending balance rather than your deity and reverence. The respect that attends wealth is as old as the Bible, which states, "If a man comes into your assembly with a gold ring and godly apparel, and there comes in also a poor man in vile apparel, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, Sit thou there, are ye not partial?" The most successful African Americans, especially those who are self-made millionaires, give us a great gift, the gift of hope. Hope that we too can join their ranks, that we can, with proper diligence, also enjoy the American dream. How to make your mark. It should come as little surprise that the tiny battered farmhouse seems to be the birthplace of so many great men and women. Hundreds of examples could easily be cited to warrant this assertion, from A.G. Gaston to Alonzo Herndon, John Merrick, Charles Clinton Spaulding, S.B. Fuller, Eddie Brown, Maggie Walker, John H. Johnson, and yes, Herman Cain. Where a lowly start would have a numbing effect on most, these people are representative of individuals of strong constitution and even stronger self-esteem, who toiled for long hours at low-paying fields they would eventually master. The story of John Wesley Dobbs provides an example. One day Dobbs, known to friends and family alike as the unofficial mayor of the famed Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia, the centerpiece of black economic development and, at the time, just a handful of promising storefronts and gravel roads, was greeted with derision by a visitor from the ever-expanding northeastern region of the country. Dobbs' guest had been boasting of New York's growing population, impressive skyline, bustling nightlife, and breathtaking architecture. After pointing out all of the positive aspects of big city life, he asked the humble civic leader, "And what do you produce on hilly, rocky landscapes of South Georgia?" Dobbs didn't hesitate. "Strong men and women," was his reply. True to form, Herman Cain has enjoyed a stellar career in the business world and an impressive presidential run. In 1977, he became the youngest vice president in the history of the Minnesota-based Pillsbury Company after just 3 years on the job. He left his position in 1982 to take a stab at the restaurant business at Burger King, a Pillsbury subsidiary. 4 years later, his success with the fast food chain prompted Pillsbury to select him to assume the presidency of one of its struggling units, Godfather's Pizza. Due in part to his relentless focus, pursuit of excellence, and constant quest to add value every step along the way, Cain turned to the pizza franchise. As a result, he became the first black president of the National Restaurant Association, the food service industry's leading trade organization. Let those who would follow in his footsteps remember that when Cain began his career at Burger King, no task was too menial for him. He answered phones, scrubbed floors, and even flipped hamburgers. After completing the franchise's required management training program in only 9 months, Cain was named vice president and general manager for Burger King's Philadelphia region, a particularly gratifying accomplishment, considering that nearly 40 years prior, he and his Morehouse classmates were refused service in a southern restaurant. To understand the arc of Herman Cain's business career, start with his modest beginnings. Though his home was small and his surroundings poor, his family was big on values. His parents provided excellent examples of hard work and self-determination, and they ensured that the Almighty served as a reference point in their children's lives. Cain's mother and father came up the hard way and fought for every inch of ground they covered. Together, they personally witnessed Jim Crow, worked at the most demanding labor, and received the type of racial oppression and bias that would make a weak person question his or her faith. Each had to lug the weight of an inferior education as well as poverty and low self-esteem. Cain's parents were well into their 50s before they could vote or eat in a white-owned restaurant. Through it all, they could proudly say that no matter the injustice or indignity, they refused to be touched by bitterness or defeat. They would not allow the insensitivity of others to turn their hearts cold. Cain's mother worked as a domestic, and his father held a handful of menial jobs, including mopping floors on the evening shift of a local bakery, when not serving as a chauffeur for the most senior executives at the Atlanta-based Coca-Cola Company. This work ethic would inspire Cain not only to work hard, but to stamp his personal brand of excellence on every task he was assigned. Managing the turnaround. In 1988, Cain, then president of Godfather's Pizza and a member of the management group that sealed the deal to acquire the fast food chain from Pillsbury, was trying to shape a course of action for the fast food chain. He had achieved what more than one industry analyst had characterized as a miracle. When Cain arrived at the pizza franchise, he found weak and indecisive executive leadership, a blurred corporate image, low morale, and poor training and support. How did he manage to turn the firm around? Here's a snapshot of the value-laden strategy he implemented, which you, the listener, can use to place yourself one step closer to your 7-figure goals. Believe that you can make a difference. As he interviewed middle managers who sought to become members of his executive staff, Cain asked each 2 questions. What excites you about your work? What type of person are you? According to Cain, financial success requires more than just an expressive imagination or positive thinking. It requires possibility thinking. The difference between wealth and poverty, success and failure, is not nearly as great as most people believe. Your current thinking ultimately will affect your future economic conditions. Develop self-confidence and always advance. Confront your fears and face them squarely. Cain shared with me over lunch that those who constantly postpone their dreams, delay the execution of their ideas, and bottle up their grand plans to be implemented at a more convenient time are always relegated to the rear. Love excellence. It's no longer just companies that must raise the bar regarding performance. It's each of us individually. Due in part to our hyper-competitive marketplace, each employee and business owner is pressed to keep getting better. In short, just okay is no longer okay. Since the days of Adam Smith and his fellow Scottish philosopher and reformer Samuel Smiles, the scarcest resource in business has always been capital. If you had it, you possessed the means to create additional wealth. If you didn't, you lacked the one resource necessary to grow your business. Today, that line of thinking is outdated. The scarcest resource is no longer money. It's personal excellence. If you fail to continually grow, learn, develop, and upgrade your skills, somewhere someone else will. And the day you meet that person, you will lose. Develop an obsession with customer service. Kill 'em with service. I forget who uttered those words, but it's still the key to financial success. Not only is this the best way to add value and build a business, but it's the single most effective strategy in which to stay employed. My philosophy has always been to exceed the expectations of the job. I always knew that for me to do well, I couldn't be just as good as the next person. I had to exceed the next person. Your rewards in life will be in direct proportion to the value of your service. Don't look for easy money. Search and identify genuine ways to offer value. Seek a product or service that provides an important contribution to the quality of life or work of your customer. Everyone earns a living by serving others. Each of us serves at least one customer, including your boss, those who report to you, as well as your spouse or family members. Who is your number one customer? Put fortune on your side. Look for opportunities to serve others. Regardless of who signs your paycheck, the principal function of your business or vocation is the winning and retention of customers. Countless people have been led to believe that the goal of a business is to earn a profit. Well, This statement is somewhat true, but the real purpose of a business is to create and retain a customer. You would do well to constantly ask yourself, what can I do to improve the quality of my service? Pursue dirty jobs. The wealthy do things that others don't like to do. Those who become financially successful never consider themselves above any task or chore. With regard to prosperity and abundance, they come to recognize that there is a price to be paid, and the sooner they get that price, the sooner they can gain the financial independence they desire. In short, to be willing to perform the dog work. Volunteer for assignments that others avoid. Put in the extra hours and make the extra phone call. Search for unsolved problems as well as unmet needs. A willingness to work hard does not negate working smart. Longer does not always equal better, but you will be known for going the extra mile as opposed to doing the bare minimum. In the words of the writer and poet Maya Angelou, do what you do so well that others cannot ignore you. What does it take? It takes your ability to embrace the calculated risk. There is no greater question that anyone can ask. These 4 simple words stand between you and your moment of prosperity. If you dare to accomplish your financial goals, if you aspire to the Creator's grand scheme, if your existence depends on it, and if you are willing to give up your time, money, and effort for it, then you must face the eternal question that confronts every would-be millionaire. What does it take? If you dare to walk through the gates of financial independence, you must answer this question. Doing so requires the courage not to bend to popular opinion. It calls for courage to refuse to follow customs and rites that run contrary to our own sense of morality. Many would-be millionaires are stymied by the prospects of foregoing a steady paycheck or facing the unknown. Most simply cannot withstand the risk. But to be creative, to venture forward, to succeed, you must be willing to lose all that you possess, to embrace uncertainty, to replace security with insecurity, to find true happiness, to be fulfilled, to be at peace with yourself and others. You must learn to embrace the calculated risk and accept complete responsibility for your actions. How to get rich. Countless feet below the pyramid at Giza lies its foundation, unseen by those who visit the historic landmark. But make no mistake, the foundation, invisible and unrecognized by most, enables the timeless treasure to stand upright and true. So it is regarding the 5th law of wealth. A large part of every financially successful life must be spent in laying foundation stones of work, perseverance, faith, and service to others in order to endure the test of time. History is replete with examples of men and women who have freed themselves from poverty and misfortune by their optimism, faith, and values. What power can poverty hold over a home where loving hearts recognize the untold riches of the head and heart? Those who can face poverty and misfortune with cheerfulness and courage are rich as well as brave. Brave and honest men and women do not work for gold. They work for love, for honor, for character. The object for which we strive tells the story of our lives. Character before wealth was the motto drilled into Colin Powell by his Jamaican working-class parents. Ordinarily, those words might not seem to provide the springboard to prosperity, but Luther, a shipping clerk in New York City's garment district, and Maud Ariel, a seamstress, knew the force of their example. Today, as the retired 4-star general and sought-after public speaker looks back over his life, he openly states, "It was the manner in which they lived their lives that spelled the difference. Their spirits took me past ambushes and landmines in Vietnam, isolation in Korea, surface-to-air missiles throughout the Middle East, roadside bombs in Baghdad, racism and humility in Columbus, Georgia, and finally to my American dream. The great aim of your life is to hold dear to your values." How to get rich? Pamela Thomas Graham asked an audience of hyper-successful Harvard Law School alums during their annual year-end celebration. And who would know better than she? Thomas Graham has always been a woman of bold ambition. Her DNA strand spells Superwoman. She is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Harvard College and graduated from both the School of Business and Harvard Law. In 1995, she was named the first black female partner at McKinsey & Company, the industry leader, followed 8 years later by Ms. Magazine's Woman of the Year. Recently, her rising star status plunged her into the world of finance as the Chief Talent, Branding and Communications Officer for industry leader Credit Suisse. Thomas Graham never sought public favor or applause, yet she has received both in abundance. She credits her success to her parents, her mother, a social worker, and her father, who sold real estate in urban Detroit. Their philosophy? We try to teach our children that it's fun to stretch your mind, to challenge yourself intellectually. We can give our children the right ideals, the best education, and open doors for them, but the rest is up to them. Thomas Graham is a change agent who was raised to place a premium on integrity and making a difference. Do more than is required and do what's right, she advises. Your reputation is your greatest asset. Not product, not price, not service, not promotion. People will buy you before they will purchase your product. Everything flows from this single trait. You can earn it only by earning it. Once you do, don't ever let it slip away. The main focus of wealth is not to do, but to become. Integrity cuts its own channel and does its own talking. What a lesson Sylvia Rhone's life is for the indolent, indecisive, aimless, and plodding who hang about neighborhoods and cities complaining of their tough circumstances, dreaming of financial success, and wondering why they are left behind in the great race of life. Wealth depends largely on personal values, and whatever weakens or impairs those qualities diminishes any chance of success. In 1983, the music industry Good Old Boys Club was finally forced to open its doors that never should have been closed, when Rhone, generally regarded as the most powerful woman in the recording industry and who served as president of Universal Motown Records until 2011, never doubted that she'd one day run her own company. Nothing could discourage her from believing that she would carve out a career in this competitive field. The Harlem, New York native, who grew up listening to Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye, says repeated encounters with bias and sexism in the music industry fueled her commitment to push harder and leave her mark. Today's music industry demands imagination and grit, and Rhone possesses both in bulk. In 1988, she became the first black woman to serve as vice president of a major record company, Atlantic Records. 3 years later, she was named co-president and CEO of her own Atlantic label, East West Records America. Although she began her career in banking and finance, Rhone has a knack of discovering and developing new music talent and for salvaging financially struggling record divisions. For years, says the Wharton graduate, colleagues have mentioned that when it comes to business, I'm more man than woman. I was never sure whether to take that statement as a compliment or an insult. I now know they didn't mean that I lack femininity. Far from it. I love my fitted designer clothes and high heels. They meant that I'm confident, assertive, persistent, tough, analytical, and strategic. To be fair, both men and women need these qualities if they are going to excel financially in the business world. Take my word for it. Women need not act like men to succeed, but to compete, we must combine male and female behaviors, assertive as well as confident, decisive as well as hardworking, if we are going to shatter the glass ceiling. This is a business, and I wouldn't be here if I failed to make an impact on the bottom line. As you gather your millions, the following questions are sure to be asked. The correct answers will seal your destiny forever. How did you acquire your fortune? Can the lives of others be found in it? Are the hopes and dreams of your fellow man and woman buried within it? Have others sacrificed their God-given rights and opportunities because of it? Has the growth of your neighbor been stunted by it? Was your chapter and honor stained by it? Was your pride and ego enlarged by it? Did envy and greed help in its accumulation? If so, you have not succeeded. As Daniel pointed out to the prophets, thou hast been weighed in the balance and found wanting. To whom much is given. As profiled in the Washington Post, it was billed as the largest, most eye-popping of the inauguration hotel packages. the J.W. Marriott's $1 million build-your-own-bowl offer. You got 300 rooms, 4 suites, $200,000 worth of food and drink, and a front row seat overlooking the Pennsylvania Avenue parade route. It was snapped up within hours of Barack Obama's presidential election by a customer the hotel declined to identify. Just hours before the gala, Marriott hotel officials announced that the buyer was a Virginia businessman who simply wanted to bring to the inauguration the disadvantaged as well as the terminally ill, wounded veterans, and others down on their luck. In the midst of the worst economic recession in more than 70 years and a downturn in corporate giving, Earl W. Stafford bucked the trend. Instead of cutting back and trimming costs, Stafford gave abundantly to those hoping to see better days. By his own estimation, the high-tech entrepreneur wrote checks for nearly $2 million to fund his People's Inaugural Project, a sprawling 3-day philanthropic effort to bring more than 400 disadvantaged citizens, including the homeless and elderly, to Washington, D.C., to participate in this once-in-a-lifetime event. Stafford said the idea was inspired by his deep religious faith and the good fortune that has come his way. The inauguration was an opportunity to remember the less fortunate and remind the country of its traditions of benevolence. We wanted to bless those who otherwise would not have an opportunity to be a part of this grand celebration, he explained. We've gotten away from those core values that made America great. We need to get back to the business of caring for each other. We must become our brother's keepers. Earl W. Stafford, the 9th of 12 children, was born in Mount Holly, New Jersey. His father, a Baptist minister, worked as a laborer for 40 years while his mother cooked and cleaned in the homes of the well-to-do. Although money was scarce, Stafford and his siblings never considered themselves poor. At an early age, each child developed a strong work ethic. A can-do attitude was the rule, not the exception. After high school, Stafford entered the Air Force, where he became an air traffic controller. While off-duty, he pursued college-level courses at the University of Massachusetts and later earned an MBA from Southern Illinois University before completing executive work at the Harvard Business School. Following his Air Force career, Stafford founded Universal Systems and Technology, Unitech, in 1988. Under his leadership, Unitech grew from a small professional services firm to a robust business with more than 400 employees. After leading Unitech for 21 years in 2009, Stafford sold it to Lockheed Martin. At that time, the company had surpassed the $150 million mark in annual sales. Much is required. The project was inspired by his deep religious faith that Stafford should direct a portion of his fortune to help the underserved. A few months later, he cornered the presidential suite at Washington, D.C.'s Hay Adams Hotel, adjacent to Lafayette Park, as well as the White House. His initial thoughts were to hire a caterer and then depart, but that changed weeks later when his brother-in-law shared a newspaper story regarding an inaugural package offered by the Marriott. The next day, Stafford bought the package. Once news of his plans hit the streets, Stafford and his foundation were overwhelmed. More than 7,000 phone calls, emails, and messages poured into his nonprofit foundation requesting tickets, nominating deserving individuals, or offering to lend a helping hand by volunteering to aid such a worthy cause. Hundreds of well-wishers even sought him out at home, some just to say thank you. Like so many of the wealth creators interviewed in this study, Stafford loves his life. Due in part to the windfall the wealth creators received after dedicating a lifetime to building their business or pursuing their financial goals, most openly state that the money is great because it buys freedom while offering a greater degree of choice. But it doesn't end there. Each is quick to point out that the wealth translates into happiness only when it is self-earned and, specifically, is the direct result of individual effort. The highest degree of happiness occurs only when you begin to affect the lives of others. Here lies the real value that you've added to the world. Each of us would do well to admit that circumstance does play a role, that wealth often places unworthy sons and daughters into high positions of influence, that contacts may place ordinary clergymen into extraordinary pulpits, That status and pedigree do gain lawyer clients, a physician patients, and the marginal student acceptance into the most prestigious programs. However, in the long run, position, clients, patients, and schools do not necessarily constitute financial success. We would be better served to realize that the best man or woman does capture the victor's cup and that character and persistent merit do win the race. You doubt me? Paul was never revered until he occupied a prison cell in Rome, and the carpenter from Galilee reached the height of his success when smitten, spat upon, tormented, and crucified. He cried in agony, and yet with triumphant satisfaction said, "It is finished." Here is the key that looks beyond all boundaries, transcends all limitations, and penetrates all obstacles. There's a saying in the Bible, Stafford reminds us, "To whom much is given, much is required." New rules of money. Two key concepts stand front and center in nearly every profile mentioned within this chapter. First, each person, whether it is Bob Johnson, Herman Cain, Pamela Thomas Graham, or Earl Stafford, could best be labeled the ultimate renegade. That is, each broke the rules and thrived on the process of change. Starting from scratch, these millionaires established a clear plan for their financial future and set goals in motion regardless of the obstacles or roadblocks that stood in their path. Second, their financial dreams did not become a reality until they implemented the fifth law of wealth. The millionaires in this study clearly understand the difference between adding value and the sad cost of mediocrity. During a King Day celebration hosted by Spelman College, the historic all-female institution, former U.S. Ambassador Andrew Young spoke before an eager student body and tried desperately to bring closure to an all-too-familiar refrain. Throughout his remarks, he explained there is no better way to honor and continue the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. than by pursuing his life's passion of freedom and equality. Leaning on the insightful thoughts of the social activist John Hope Bryant, the former congressman and King confidant crafted his words by clarifying that the next phase of the civil rights movement will focus on silver rights, the financial empowerment of those who fought so valiantly to win their basic human rights. The dollar, Young admonished, speaks with a universal voice and dialect, challenging the underserved to seek a hand up and not a handout. It's time that each of us learns how to fish. Give a man or woman a fish and feed them for a day, but teach them how to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. In this competitive and information-driven economy, we must learn how to fish so we won't go to our neighbors asking for fish. We must learn how to fish so we won't go marching to the mayor's office begging for fish. We must learn how to fish so we don't go picketing Congress demanding fish because Congress is running out of fish. God places into our hands the book of life, bright on every page with open secrets, and we will indeed suffer if it drops out of our hands unread. No matter how tired or how tried, serving others blesses and curses not. The most important work you will ever engage in is the opportunity to be of service to others. And what of those who will not or cannot serve? While the great majority of Black Americans embrace mainstream wealth-creating values, a clearly identifiable contingent does not. In the 1970s, we referred to members of this class as the hardcore unemployed. Graphic media depictions of the plight of urban underclass have helped to underscore the compelling argument that at the base of much inner-city poverty lies the value and behavior of ghetto residents. Values that, with concerted effort, can be changed for the better. They were made the poster children in the fight for civil rights and later the war on poverty. The goal was to enable them, in addition to the rest of Black America, to be free and self-sufficient. But in spite of a successful civil rights campaign and trillions of dollars spent over decades to combat poverty, as of this writing, a group of low-income African Americans have yet to set a course to fight their way out of poverty. They have yet to accept and implement mainstream values. They have failed to place a value on education, precipitating their own demise, either for themselves or their children. This disregard for knowledge results in a lack of job skills, opportunities for advancement, low self-esteem, and the inability to achieve economic independence. Mistakenly, they believe they are victims of crippling racism and thus refuse to accept any personal responsibility for their fate. This misguided faction has been bred to know only the lifestyle embodied in an entitled welfare culture based on racism, victimization, and defeatism. It is a lifestyle completely lacking in the laws of wealth and the promise that the future holds. Without the belief that you can be all that you want to be, this defeatist attitude leaves those trapped under its spell with little drive, forcing millions to live at the same level of misery. Without a wish to rise, a desire to accomplish, and a passion to attain, no life will succeed. Instead of developing the millionaire mindset, these lost souls are held captive by a welfare mentality. For those of you who fall under the latter category, please, I beg of you, don't misunderstand me. This passage is written with the utmost care and compassion. No blame game here. At first glance, much of what I'm sharing may seem radical or inconsistent with the thoughts and philosophies of established black leadership. So be it. This is how I see it. Here is what I've discovered. Don't lament and grieve over lost opportunity or wealth. The Creator may see something mighty in you that even He cannot bring about as long as you persist in your ways. God may see a rough diamond in you that only the hard hits of lack and limit can polish. Here lies a philosophy that you must adopt and apply if you hold any hope of joining the ranks of this growing body of wealth creators. As my survey data and focus groups have revealed, the overwhelming majority of millionaires profiled in this study began their trek to wealth under the direst circumstances. Many were beyond the term poor, but few, if any, could be labeled low income. So many of these wealth creators, if not all, learned their values in middle-class households, regardless of whether their parents were classified middle class. Their childhoods were infused with the virtue of work, education, respect for authority, modesty, independence, and self-determination. When I asked for the reasons underlying their achievements, these values were abundantly clear. Topping the list were middle-class values and the mainstays of entrepreneurial success such as hard work, perseverance, treating others in the manner in which you would like to be treated, as well as a bit of luck. Furthermore, despite several $1 million in liquid assets, nearly 80% of the black financial elite called themselves middle class. More than 70% describe themselves as people with simple needs, and nearly 50% don't feel wealthy. Likewise, today's black wealthy tend to think of themselves less as rich and more as people who come from modest means, work hard, pursued their dreams, and achieved a level of success. Furthermore, society is cajoled into believing that the poor are poor simply because they lack money. A popular solution suggests that alleviating poverty is quite simple. Just get money into the hands of the impoverished. If that were true, we as a nation could easily rid ourselves of poverty by printing more money. At various points in their development, nearly every millionaire in this study was broke. By the simplistic definition just discussed, he or she would be considered poor, equally poor to the millions of Americans who fall below the poverty line. Yet each millionaire was motivated, eager, teachable, and bent on rising to the top by starting at the bottom. Now compare this man or woman to his or her impoverished counterpart who lives life at the margin. At one time, both lacked money, but only one was poor. So for those of you who have decided to use the wealth choice as the linchpin on your journey to financial success, do not be dismayed or deceived. Poverty is an all too familiar starting point. Whereas the term poor refers to the absence of wealth, low income means much more. A man or woman who has no or little money is indeed poor, but an individual who lacks values as well as hope and ideas is poorer still. Be poor, if you must, but never be low income. Though a rich mind and a noble spirit will lift anyone from the most humble beginnings, to be low income is to lack all values that can and will eventually lead to wealth. You can't get points today for yesterday's game. While seated in the Potter's House in Dallas, Texas, Bishop T.D. Jakes shared his wisdom on economic empowerment in an interview. So many times I advise young men who are experiencing difficulty finding a job to create one. I do so because I learned as a little boy that if success doesn't come after you, you must go after it. Tears will get you sympathy, but sweat will get you change. No truer words have ever been spoken. There is so much to do and so many to serve. All you need is one good idea, but the extent of your opportunity to be of service will invariably correlate with your imagination coupled with your education. And the best place to begin is where you are. The men and women profiled in this audiobook are by definition self-made. Most have delivered themselves from garages to greatness, from basements to owning professional sports teams, from bootstraps to big time. Throughout my research, none of my survey respondents ever blamed anyone for their own failures or struggles as they marched to wealth and success. Nor did they bemoan the fact that they may have been forced to deal with life's recesses while others pursued their financial goals in relative ease and comfort. They simply took responsibility for their lives. Perhaps David Steward, CEO and founder of Worldwide Technologies, said it best. Here is a man who built from scratch the nation's largest black-owned company, a $4 billion monolith. In 1981, while working as an account executive for Federal Express, he was recognized as Salesman of the Year and inducted into the company's Hall of Fame. Steward was presented with a trophy, an ice bucket on which his initials were engraved. When he peered inside the bucket, he noticed that it was empty. Steward saw this as his defining moment, and he asked himself if that was what he wanted out of life. At the time, he and his wife had 2 small children, a mortgage, and all the trappings of success that could keep you locked into a job, but he was ready for so much more. Years from now, he said, when I would look back over my life, I don't want any regrets. I don't want to say the reason why I didn't chase my dream was because I lacked faith in God, or that I was comfortable with the status quo. I had so much more to give. Others are quick to point out what you should be, but you're the only person who can decide what you will be. Feel free to disagree, but I don't see much merit in poverty. Frankly, I can't see poverty being eliminated in your lifetime or mine. Still, I believe each of us can do our part toward that goal by creating wealth for ourselves in a way that adds value, serves, and enhances the lives of others. If you are fortunate to join the 35,000 or so black millionaires who currently live in the United States, your actions and efforts will undoubtedly impact countless consumers or businesses across all economic strata in a positive and fruitful way, one hopes. I can only offer the words that the singer and actor Tyrese Gibson shared with my students nearly a year ago. You can't get points today for yesterday's game. So every day you've got to be focused on being bigger, better, and greater than you've ever been. Each day you must change the war on poverty to a prosperity program for abundance. And the process begins by serving others. Or, in other words, by implementing the 5th law of wealth. How may I serve thee? Millionaire lesson number 6. Others are quick to point out what you should be, but you're the only person who can decide what you will be. Dave Steward.